Thanks for watching the video. This is Pascal for EMP Reviews. This video is a Halloween special. The main focus will be Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and released in 1992. I will first discuss the historical Vlad the Impaler, that is an account of his most brutal acts, and I will differentiate between those that are regarded as fact as opposed to legend. Then I will quickly summarize the 1992 theatrical release and then go over the movie The Last Voyage of the Demeter, as it depicts the travel Dracula took from Romania to England. The entirety of the information gathered here on Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, Vlad Dracula, Vlad III, or even Vlad of Sagite, as titled in the Gary Oldman movie, is taken from the YouTube video Dracula, the Man and Myth documentary presented by the People's Profiles. He was possibly born in 1431 in the citadel of Sighisoara in Wallachia, part of modern-day Romania, but that is uncertain. After an extensive history of Vlad I and II, which not only painted a history of the chaotic political and warlike existence in that region of Europe, I eventually came across the voivode of Wallachia and his brutal acts. Vlad III practiced impalement, a tradition applied to enemies of the Ottoman Empire, a punishment that is speculated he witnessed when growing up. The documentary describes that the first group of individuals that suffered this punishment by Vlad were boyar prisoners who were impaled in specific visible locations that served as a warning to anyone who would oppose him. He also allowed animals to feed on his victims, exposing them to the elements, burning them alive, slicing off body parts, fingers, eyes, tongues, toes, ears, noses, breasts, nipples, penises, etc. Also, other gruesome sentences were being skinned alive and execution through boiling. It's said that this ruler would sometimes feast and watch while these abuses were carried out. Apparently, women were targeted even more aggressively, especially those that were unfaithful or widowed or promiscuous while single. These abuses were mutilation or impalement on a hot poker while their lovers were forced to watch. Some of these men were also forced to consume the body parts that were released. But all of these stories are open to interpretation. They are possibly created by people who consider themselves more civilized than Vlad, specifically writers in Buda and Vienna. One story depicts Vlad III as having invited hundreds of poor Tirogovistians to a large feast. He ordered the doors of the location locked and then to set the facility ablaze. However, the documentary describes this event as a tale sensationalized by the Turks, Hungarians, Transylvanians, and other enemies of Vlad. Stories that are more credible do involve impalement, especially to foreigners that mistreated his citizens. In one occasion, Vlad discovered a trap set for him by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Mehmed II. Vlad in turn set a trap for the Sultan's men, led by Hamza Pasha, the Sultan's Bey or chieftain of Nicopolis. All of them were impaled, with Pasha at a higher level to indicate his rank. In 1462, the prince engaged in a fierce campaign against these Ottomans, killing 23,000, including their sympathizers. Again, many of them were impaled and placed in very visible locations. But as Mehmed continued to advance in Vlad's territories, causing his forces to retreat, he still struck back in gruesome and very effective ways. In the path of the Turks, Vlad poisoned lakes with bodies of animals and humans, burned farmlands, initiated night raids, ordered people, including kids, sick with contagious illnesses such as the bubonic plague, leprosy, tuberculosis, cholera, to travel to Ottoman camps or to stay in villages the Ottomans traveled through. One systematic raid against the Sultan's forces, called the Night Attack on Teragoviste, killed 15,000 men at a loss of Vlad's forces of only 5,000. Despite the surviving soldiers being demoralized, the Sultan ordered his troops to continue, that is until they came across a forest comprised of impaled remains of Pasha and his men, a sight that convinced the Ottomans to return home. Despite all of these gruesome tales, I was surprised to see that there were no stories, at least based on myth, that would somehow draw a direct line to a creature of the night that feeds directly on humans, The portrayal that has been constructed in so many pieces of entertainment for Dracula. (1462). The Turks overtook Constantinople and vast areas of Europe. Dracula arose as a Romanian knight of the Sacred Order of the Dragon, leaving his wife Elisabetta to fight the invaders. Having defeated these Turks, their survivors sent false words to Elisabetta that her husband died in battle, prompting her to end her life in sorrow. In revenge for allowing this to happen, Dracula swore revenge against God, who he blamed for his devastating loss. 4 centuries later, at Carfax Asylum in London, an inmate, Reinfeld, swears his allegiance to Dracula. He was previously sent to visit the Count, his client, who is purchasing properties in the city. Jonathan Harker is sent to take over the transactions to Dracula's location, Transylvania. In a misstep, Harker accidentally insults the Count's lineage, the Order of the Dracul, and descendants of Attila the Hun, resulting in an initial delivery of Dracula's anger, eccentricities, and declarations that he is the last of his kind. After finalizing the purchase of the 10 houses he desired, Dracula is struck at the sight of Jonathan's fiancée Mina in a photograph, bearing a striking resemblance to Elisabetta. He instructs Jonathan to write to all who know him letters stating that he desired to stay in the castle for a month. We then meet Mina's rich friend Lucy and the group of men who pine for her, and sometime later, one of them, Dr. Seward at the asylum, records notes on Reinfeld's condition. This resident describes a disturbing lust for blood, animals to consume as an effort to please a master who will then grant him immortality as a reward. He then concludes these goals with an attack. Harker's diary describes his exceedingly uncomfortable stay at the castle, further evidenced by a rather bizarre visit by the Count, who is repelled by his reflection in a mirror as well as a crucifix. Some days later, he stops 3 of his vampire mistresses from feeding on Jonathan, offering them an alternative to their intended prey, an extremely terrifying sight for Harker. Eventually, Jonathan witnesses Dracula's men filling crates with soil that will be transported to his locations in London on the vessel the Demeter. One of them will house the Count. On the ship, the captain's log describes several instances of crew members missing and his belief that a dreadful form of danger is on board. After reaching the city, Dracula infects Lucy and has the ability to do this unseen, even in front of Mina's eyes. Introducing himself as Vlad of Sagite, Dracula manages to woo Mina and, despite his urges, stops himself from infecting her with the undead curse. Seward tries to treat Lucy's malady as her ailment alters her behavior disturbingly. The doctor is at a loss and, with her now official fiancé's Arthur's blessing, sends an invite to his former professor, the eccentric Van Helsing. He arrives just in time to interrupt another one of Dracula's feedings on Lucy. Helsing explains that the source of Lucy's condition is something dreadfully supernatural, needing her blood to live. He eventually concludes that the culprit is Dracula. Mina, on a date with the Count, recalls the previous life in which they were together. She remembers her death, but also her love for him. Jonathan miraculously manages to escape and is rescued by a convent of sisters. Lucy gets worse as she is stopped by Helsing when attempting to feed on one of her previous romantic pursuers. The Count is devastated when he receives the decision from Mina that she is ending their courtship. In spite of the men's armed preparation for another visit by Dracula to again drain Lucy, as warned by Van Helsing, he manages to kill her. Meanwhile, Jonathan marries Mina, who joined him at his location. Some days later, Helsing leads the men to soon discover that Lucy is now undead. To end her cursed existence, she is beheaded after striking a stake through her heart. With his investigation of Jonathan, Helsing concludes that he is not cursed, having himself not fed on the blood of his female group of vampires. Reinfeld warns Mina of the coming danger from Dracula and is later punished for it. Dracula visits Mina, who convinces him to infect her in spite of his initial refusal to curse her with the plague that is an undead existence. They are interrupted by Helsing and the men, who battle a gruesome bat-like form of the Count, who curses what God has turned him into, and then leaves as a school of rats. Through Mina, Helsing discovers where the Count retreats to and directs the men to attack him there. Meanwhile, he fights off Mina's possession outburst and beheads the women who previously fed on Jonathan. After defeating Dracula's men who managed to transport him to the front of his castle, Dracula comes out of his crate and is stabbed. Mina retreats with him inside. Dracula eventually asks Mina to release him from his curse, lamenting God's abandonment of him. Painfully, she obliges. For myself, Coppola's adaptation is a visual marvel more than anything else. Being 1992, many years before the standard use of digital imagery, the impressive practical effects were very striking and impressive. The artistic approach to the visuals and the delivery of the plot definitely categorize this movie as genre, as opposed to straight storytelling. Examples of this are the bleeding of the altar at Dracula's sorrow and anger at Elisabetta's body, the invitation by Dracula's driver and his bizarrely elongated arm to Harker to enter the carriage, this narration on the way to Transylvania, imaginative shadows that expand on the plot, and countless more impressively color-saturated examples. What I find to be the most disappointing aspect of the film, ironically, is the reported and even recorded unpleasant behavior Gary Oldman displayed during the production.
Cut. Nothing like what we're doing. You saying the line?
No, because
the only way to do it is to say the lines, because then you know that when you're at that line, to live in a new house would kill me. I don't know what you're waiting for, because we can't kill you. You're the one doing
No,
the thing.
I'm waiting for Keanu. All I'm doing is waiting for Keanu, because I can start...
What are you waiting to Keanu for? Keanu never does anything. You just walk right out of the thing.
Coppola at times makes odd casting choices. In The Godfather 3, he cast his daughter to play Mary Corleone, a choice and resulting performance that critics and audiences repeatedly panned. And for Jonathan Harker, Keanu Reeves was chosen to play this attorney. His presentation here was even worse than that in Dangerous Liaisons as Chevalier Danceny.
But you'll have to leave Transylvania immediately. Opportunities such as this come but once in a lifetime.
Yes, of course, sir. If I may inquire, what in fact happened to Mr. Renfield in Transylvania?
Nothing. Nothing.
Yes, sir. I will give it my full attention.
My favorite Japanese animated film is Vampire Hunter: The Bloodlust, and it is obvious that its producers took some valuable notes from Bram Stoker's Dracula for their film, as these scenes and several others show. The most impressive aspect of Stoker's Dracula is the numerous versions of the Count. For one, the costume designer was Aiko Ishioka, who incidentally also worked on The Cell and one of my all-time favorite films, The Fall. The blood red armor was a very unconventional design, while the chalk white skin version of Vlad in his castle was striking, only to be matched by Oldman's disturbing performance. I could not find any other film or TV vampires that had so many forms as we see in this depiction of Dracula. The most impressive shape, though it outshines Ishioka's red cloak only by a slight margin, is the enormous bat, which laments God's apparent curse and then uses the shadows to transform into an alarming, unexpected school of rats. Also, the assault on Lucy was in the form of a wolf, and then there is the more peaceful Sagite. Myself, I think Anthony Hopkins almost steals the show at times with his eccentric and ill-mannered source of comedy. Bram Stoker's Dracula was released in November 1992. My research found that critics' reactions were mixed, and the same was said about general audiences. The financial reception for the movie was a lot more decisive, multiplying its budget. In 1897, the Demeter, a chartered ship to carry cargo from Romania to England, arrived in Wyby, England as a derelict. No one was on board, but found was the captain's log describing the events that took place on the ship. The story starts 4 weeks before this discovery. A stowaway is discovered by Dr. Clemens, who gives this ill woman, Anna, a blood transfusion in order to fight the infection he discovers she has. Eventually, the crew's dog and all livestock are discovered killed. Some days later, a crewman is also killed by Dracula, but only described to be missing by the crew, and the morning after, Anna finally wakes and communicates her fears to the crew, begging them to get off the vessel. She describes Dracula to Clemens as a creature that lived in the mountains, in an extremely older castle, that appears as a man only when necessary to hide its true form, feeding on blood of people at night. Dracula kills another crew member, this time in view of a witness, Olgarin. The following day, the man is unhinged, suffering from a bite from Dracula. Later, he is possessed, breaks his bindings, chases Captain Elliot's son Toby, but is stopped by Wojciech while Dracula, in Toby's locked room, reveals himself to him, to Elliot and others, before biting the boy. Olgarin describes his now enhanced senses and is eviscerated by the morning sun, now being transformed by Dracula's bite. Believing that they are all being punished for their sins, Joseph leaves the Demeter in a lifeboat, a useless effort to escape as Dracula eventually reaches him. Meanwhile, Anna describes to Clemens when they decide to open all of the cargo crates that Dracula is on the ship to get to London as her country has run out of people to feed on, the arrangement her villagers had with the vampire. Toby now dead, he actually surprises everyone by attacking his father during his funeral as essentially a zombie, only to be lit by the bright sunrise. With the captain injured, all decide Dracula must be stopped before shore is reached. A trap is set, with the sinking of the ship as the method to kill him. Elliot declares he will sail the ship away from London alone. That night, Dracula initially kills 2 crew members, the second one while he was trying to damage the ship for sinking. The captain is killed, Clemens is injured, but both he and Anna manage to severely injure Dracula before jumping off the ship. Dracula survives his injuries while Anna reveals to Clemens that she is once again cursed and infected. He watches as she allows herself to inflame in the morning light, and he eventually reaches the city. He discovers where Dracula sleeps during the day and one night has an encounter with him in a pub, with the vampires revealed to Clemens being a taunt. At the end of the story, the doctor swears he will defeat him. The last Voyage of the Demeter was released in August of last year, was a financial failure, and quickly forgotten by movie audiences. I am doing a short review of this film due to its narrative centering on Dracula's voyage from Romania to England, the travel depicted in the original book, and which was covered for a short period in Coppola's adaptation. Directed by André Ovredal, I will give it praise for some scenes. The funeral scene for Toby is impressive and a good form of exposition in telling the audience the effects of a bite by Dracula. It's at this point in the film that actor Liam Cunningham's acting prowess really starts and only ends with his character's death. I will also give it praise for some of the bone-chilling events, the convincing environments, and compelling performances. Here, Dracula's form is similar to the bat form from the 1992 film, with a face reminiscent to Nosferatu. Perhaps a nitpick, but it seems odd that Dracula has wings sizable enough to even achieve flight, but at other times are completely invisible. I have to admit, though I dismissed this movie at my first viewing months ago, I enjoyed it a lot more when watching it for the purpose of research for this video. I do recommend this movie only if you are an overall die-hard fan of horror, a fan of the character of Dracula, or to watch another impressive performance by Game of Thrones' Liam Cunningham. Thanks for watching the video. Have a fun and safe Halloween.